Good afternoon and welcome to Ziegfeld University. And this is March the 3rd, and it's really cold out there today. It was 14 degrees this morning, and I'm looking forward to spring arriving at any moment now. Now, today's topic is going to be on Flavius Josephus. What? Flavius Josephus. Now, why do we care about this? In the 19th century, if you were a farmer in upstate New York, you didn't have a lot of money for a library, so you would have the King James Bible on the shelf, and next to it you'd have a copy of Flavius Josephus. Flavius Josephus. And so in the 19th century, people would read Josephus and the Bible and Josephus. And why is that an important thing? Well, when you read the Holy Bible, you read the Gospels, what is the central event of the New Testament that's unspoken? The destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem, August 10, 70 AD. That's the central event. This would be like somebody living in New York, and do you have to talk about the 9/11 event? Not really. If you lived through that, you know all about it. So I don't have to go on and on about the 9/11 event. Well, in the first century AD, when the New Testament documents, books are being circulated, they didn't have to fill you in on the background of the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. It was a disaster. And who was it a disaster for? The Jewish people, of course, but it was also a disaster for the Christian religion. And remember, how did the temple work? There's one temple, and there's multiple synagogues. About 6,000 synagogues in the countryside. The one temple is where animal sacrifices take place, and what else is there? It's the central bank. You know, people want to go to Fort Knox now and see if there's any gold in it. I don't think there's gold there. It was last audited in 1953, but the temple in Jerusalem was like Fort Knox. It stored the annual temple tax that every Jew living in the diaspora, about 8 million, had to send a tax in one time a year, and it was collected in the vaults of the Second Temple. So if you have a couple of centuries of people paying their dues in gold coins and throwing it into the vault, it's going to accumulate into a large fortune. After the temple was destroyed on August 10, 70 AD, General Titus, right, and who did it? The 5th, 10th, 12th, and 15th Roman Legion. They burned the temple to the ground, and they killed as many Jews as possible, and the ones that were lucky enough to survive, were brought to Rome and marched in triumph to further humiliation, and they were all sold into slavery. And where did they end up? Working in salt mines. Is this a good thing? You want to work in a salt mine as a slave in the Roman Empire? The answer would be no. That's basically a death sentence. And the Romans regard slavery as more humane than just killing you outright. So for them, about 80% of the population in the Roman Empire were slaves. So the rebellious Jews sold into slavery August 10th. And when they looted the temple, they took all the valuable objects home, like the menorah, right, the lamp. They took the gold reserve back with them. And how much money was it? They built the Colosseum in Rome out of money from the destruction of the Second Temple. So you've seen pictures of the Colosseum in Rome? You know, it would be like sort of like the stadium the Governor Hochul's building in Buffalo for the Buffalo Bills. You know, $1.5 billion. Yeah, it's a lot of money. Okay, and the Colosseum is still there. So what else is it? It's a religious center. It's an archives, so they have tax records and people's genealogies recorded. Is that an important thing? For a Christian point of view, genealogies are really important because we want to know who Jesus is. Remember, if you read Matthew chapter 1, 1 through 17, it's the genealogy of Jesus going back to Abraham and David. So genealogy is extremely important. So in other words, it's like the nerve center of the Jewish world and Jews living in the diaspora. 2 million Jews in Israel, Palestine, another 6 million living in the Roman Empire. Now, when this temple is destroyed, it's a disaster of the highest magnitude. Imagine if the Library of Congress got burned to the ground, along with, say, St. Patrick's Cathedral destroyed and Fort Knox gets looted, right? It's all those things rolled into one. Or the Vatican gets destroyed, right? Imagine what that would be like. So for Jews, they would, what do we do now? Well, what do they do now? This is where Rabbinic Judaism is introduced. So around 85 AD, it's called the Council of Jamnia. Rabbis, Pharisees took refuge in this little village and they studied and basically they reimagined Judaism without a temple. So what is a synagogue? A place of Torah study and prayer, like a Jewish community center. They do not do animal sacrifices in synagogues. There's only one place to do the sacrifice, the temple, and it's gone. So with Christianity, what do we say about the do we need a temple?
No.
No. Jesus is where two or more are gathered in his name. So we solve the problem of you don't need a central building or a temple for your religion to thrive. Christianity is where two or more are gathered, is that Christ is present with us now. See how that works? So the destruction of the temple is kind of the unwritten thing that you're supposed to know about when you read the Old and New Testament. Also, there's a lot of other things in there. Who's Herod anyway?
Which one?
Well, there you go. That's the right question, Mike. It's like the Kennedy family, right? So do I have my Herod diagram here? Yeah, here. Look at this. This is the house of Herod, the Herodian dynasty. So basically you have to keep a scorecard when you read the New Testament. In the book of Acts it'll say, and Herod did this. Well, what Herod? Right? So there are many, many Herods. It's like the Kennedy family. Right? There's a lot of them, right? So you have to really... So when they wrote the New Testament, they assumed that you knew which Herod they're talking about. Do we know about that? No, it's 2,000 years later, and we need more information in order to know what Herod they're talking about. So what do we do about this? Well, we have the Bible, but we also have this. We have Flavius Josephus. Now, this is, I'm holding this up so you can see this. This is the Paul L. Meyer translation and abridgment of the complete works of Flavius Josephus. This is the one that you want to buy. It costs about $14. You buy it on Amazon, and it has charts and maps and all kinds of goodies in here, little footnotes to help you understand, right? Help you understand the New Testament. And again, why is Josephus important? Josephus is the only surviving eyewitness to the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, August 10, 70 AD. So this would be like, how many? Do we have any eyewitnesses that saw the collapse of the 9/11, the Twin Towers? Yeah, right. You could just talk to them. You could say, well, what happened? You know, well, there's only one witness of the destruction of the temple. The contemporary, he witnessed the temple being destroyed, and he's on the Roman side watching this destruction take place of the most important religious building for the Jewish world. He watched this, the tragedy of it. And so let's talk a little bit about Josephus. First of all, he's born in the year 37 AD. Stop. What's the date that we use for Jesus? 7 BC to 33 AD. Okay, that's circa, right? Around that date. Now, 70 AD is our anchor point for the destruction of the temple. So Josephus is born after the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, and before the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. So he's born 4 years after the DBR of Jesus, and this is the first year of the Roman Emperor Caligula, to give you some perspective here. And he lived until circa 100 AD. We don't quite know what happened to him. He went to Rome and he died, and he was a famous person who just sort of faded away. So we put around 100 AD. So he's in that time period. What is that? That's 1st century AD, right? So what's the New Testament again? I believe with Bishop John A.T. Robertson, who wrote this book in 1972, redating the New Testament, that all 27 books are written prior to 70 AD in the New Testament. So this is like right in the window there, right? The gap between 70, well, he witnessed the events of 70 AD, so he's right in the thick of the action. Now, what is Josephus' religion? Is he a Christian? No, he's not like Paul, right? He is like Paul in a way. Paul's a Pharisee who was converted to Christianity on the Damascus Road. Remember, he had the vision of the risen Lord? So he's a Jew, but wait, what kind of Jew is he? Well, let me see. He's a Pharisee. And put a red flag by this, I'll talk about the three philosophies of Judaism that Josephus tells us about in a little bit, so don't go away. Let me do Josephus first. So, what does he do? All right, he's born in a priestly family in Jerusalem, and that means a high-ranking family, and he's a Pharisee, and he claims that he had an outstanding education. So this would be like the Apostle Paul, who sat at the feet of Gamaliel, the great Pharisee leader. So he probably spoke Hebrew and Aramaic, could read it too, and he probably spoke Koine Greek, that's the language of the New Testament, and he probably spoke Aramaic. You know, Aramaic's like the common language of the streets, and he probably spoke a little bit of Latin, understood Latin. So he's a highly educated person. And so he's in 64 AD, okay, what year? 64 AD, right? He's sent to Rome as an ambassador, a delegate from the leaders of the Pharisee leaders in Jerusalem, and he's supposed to negotiate a deal, cut a deal. Like Zelensky, he's in Washington trying to cut it, that's him. He goes to Rome to try to cut a deal with the Romans to get more favorable treatment among the Jewish community in the Roman Empire. Let me stop here for a minute. There's a lot of tangents to talk about here. What do Jews and Romans think of each other in the first century AD? Huh? Yeah. Is it a harmonious thing? The odd thing about it, it is pretty harmonious, right? Remember, the Greco-Roman Empire, what are they? Polytheistic, pantheistic. What is Judaism? A theistic religion. Creator-creation dichotomy. Now, the Romans thought that that was a very strange thing. How could you have only one God that you can't see? Pompey Magnus, he conquers Jerusalem for the Romans in 63 BC. One of the things he did, he went into the temple and went into the Holy of Holies to look around to see if he could see God. And it was empty, because the Ark of the Covenant, remember, disappeared, you know? So he shook his head in disgust. He couldn't believe it. There's no God around. I mean, he wanted to see what God looked like, right? I mean, right? If you went to a temple of Zeus, you'd see a statue of Zeus and go, oh, okay, right? So they also thought that Jews were lazy. Why would they think that?
Because they were more the type to study the Torah.
Yeah, what's the Sabbath day?
Well, the Levites didn't work at all.
What's the Sabbath day?
Day of rest.
Well, the Romans work all 7 days a week, unless it's a Roman holiday. I mean, that's a weird thing. Like, why would you take a perfectly good day off and not work? Right? So they thought that was very strange. Hey, I have a Jewish friend. Come on over to my house for dinner. We're going to have like dormice, and we're going to have maybe like cooked swans, and maybe a pork roast, And what is the Jewish friend going to say to you?
No.
Why? Because they keep kosher food laws, right? So then they think, oh, they're exclusive. They're too good to eat with us. They won't break bread with us. Have communion with us, right? And they're lazy. They don't work one day of the week. I can't believe they would do something like this, right? And they insist on studying Hebrew scrolls. Is that a little weird? Yeah, the Romans believed that you should read like Homer or read Virgil, the Aeneid, about how Rome was founded by people Aeneas who escaped the destruction of Troy, and they're interested in that kind of stuff. Greco-Roman history, Jewish history, they regard as it's really old, and it's kind of mildly interesting if you want to know about antiquities, old time stuff, but it's an odd religion. It's a strange religion. Why don't they just give up their religion and act like the rest of us? They want to assimilate. You're supposed to assimilate, become a part of the Roman Empire. Remember, Romans believe the world is divided into two parts: civitas, that's civilization, and pagans. Pagans are people who live in the countryside. Civitas people are people who live in cities. They go to the hippodrome, they have Roman baths, they have libraries, they have theater, they have fine banquets, great social. You want to be in a city, be in a Roman city. You don't want to be in the countryside, right? That's for like hillbillies, hicks, you know. The countryside is no good. I prefer the country myself, right? Being white trash myself, I prefer living in the country, right? So I watch the news every night and go, wow, I'm glad we don't live in a city, right? So-and-so got shot or something, you know. I like living in the country. But the Roman thing, you want to live in a city. So basically, and what is the status of the Greco-Roman religion in the 1st century AD? How's it doing? Well, yeah, but talk about, I mean, was it like a thriving religion, or basically people knew that it was a hoax, right? Imagine you're in the Kremlin in 1980. Are you going to stand up and say, the Communist Manifesto is a bunch of hooey, and Das Kapital doesn't work in reality, it's a fake thing? But if you say that, they're going to take you out and kill you, send you to a gulag, right? So what do you say when they ask you about Das Kapital? It's the greatest book ever written. I just love it. I can't wait for the movie to come out, right? So the Roman religion is like that. If you want to rise through the ranks of the Roman legions, the military, you have to say, oh yeah, Jupiter, Zeus is a real thing. And oh yeah, Apollo, and people lost faith in the old time Greco-Roman religions. People knew it wasn't, you know. And what are the Romans interested in? Anything that comes from the East. Do we have that in our society today? I think we went to the diner in Saugerties on the way out. There's some Swami, some Maharishi guy from India that's willing to teach you classes for like $1,000 an hour or something, right? He's got some guy from India, you know? We're so stupid, we believe anybody who comes from India. They work at the dollar store. What do you care about their religion, right? We're interested in oh, my parents are Episcopalian, they're so boring. But since I'm a hippie, I'm going to become a Hindu, okay? So a lot of people who dabble in the New Age movement or Indian mysticism are basically people that don't like the Christian religion, and they want to if you don't believe anything, you believe anything. So instead they believe polytheism, okay? Now, do I like people from India? I love India. I've been there 3 times. I wish I could go back again. I'd leave tomorrow if I could, right? But if you like economic development and people that are prospering, by their fruits you shall know them. Hinduism has the caste system, right? And Dalit people, untouchable, that's about 30% of the population. Yeah, they just let them laying in the street and bleed out and die of horrendous things because they have to suffer the karma. They have to suffer for sins in a previous life, and you're not allowed to help these people. It's unbelievable. And a lot of the economic backwardness of India is because of Hinduism combined with the London School of Economics, Flavian socialism. You know, they came and they instituted that stuff in India, and they're stuck. They're stuck in 1940. They can't get out of that, right? But so the Hindu, polytheism is not a good thing, and the Romans knew that, but they're interested in anything that comes from the East, right? The religion of Mithras, right? That comes from Persia. Oh, that's so interesting for them. Do they like astrology? Oh, astrology is so interesting, right? And do they like to take animals and slash them open and plop their entrails on the wall and look at it? Yeah, they can read the entrails of an animal that's sacrificed, right? Or they look at auguries. They look at birds. Oh, look, there's a flight of birds, and it's spelling out the winning lottery ticket. Let's all play that one. Okay, so when you believe anything, Romans are extremely superstitious, but they're open to ideas from the East. One of the things they're attracted to, believe it or not, is what? Judaism. Many well-read Romans and Greeks, they read the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament. They like the idea of one God. They like the moral ideas of the 10 Commandments, the 613 laws in the Torah. They're kind of attracted to this. And so they're attracted to it and repelled by it at the same time. Right? And so there are 8 million Jews living in the diaspora at this time. That's a big percentage of the population. So Josephus is a Jew who goes to Rome to try to negotiate a better agreement for the Jewish community in Alexandria, Egypt, and in Jerusalem. And when he's in Jerusalem, what did he see? I mean, when he's in Rome, what did he see? Remember, Caesar Augustus, he took the city of Rome. It was a city of brick, and when he died at 14 AD, it was a city of marble. So it'd be like people who go to Washington, D.C. and look around at those great buildings there and go, wow. It would take the Roman architecture is designed to take your breath away. The vast buildings and the glorious columns and the architecture, it's supposed to take your breath away. Where's Josephus coming from? He's coming from the hinterlands, Jerusalem. The temple is pretty impressive. But when you get outside of that, mostly it's like a lot of like little huts and so on. When you go to Rome and see this, it must have been absolutely breathtaking. Remember, the Apostle Paul, what was his big thing in life? He always wanted to go to Rome to see what Rome looked like. I mean, a city of over 1 million people in the ancient world. That's a huge city. All roads lead to Rome. So to see Rome would be quite a thing. So he goes to Rome, and what did he see? Roman legions. Roman legions. There's 28 Roman legions. Each legion has 6,000 men, not including auxiliaries. That's like reserve troops. So when you see the Roman legions, are you going to go, yeah, let's do a rebellion against Rome? You're going to look at the Roman legions and you're going to go, I probably don't want to fight these people, right? The most effective, they held it together for like 1,500 years. So the Roman legions are highly disciplined, professional soldiers. You're in for 25 years at a time when you enlist as a Roman soldier. And they're the elite forces in the entire world. And you're going to say, yeah, let's take, we have a bunch of like sheep herders, and let's get those people and we'll go fight the Roman legion. That would be insane, okay? So he goes to Rome, he comes back, he fails his mission. Around 66 AD in the city of Caesarea Maritimia. What is that? Caesarville by the sea? This is where the Roman headquarters, where people like Pontius Pilate would stay during the year, except during Passover, and he would take troops to go up the hill to Jerusalem to maintain law and order, because the city is full of like a couple million pilgrims that are coming for the Passover Seder's, right? So Caesarea, it's the Roman capital of Judea or Israel, whatever you want to call it. And so there are many Gentiles, non-Jews, and there's a riot that breaks out between the Jews and the Gentiles. The Romans, there's a riot. And that people get so upset about that it triggers the Jewish War, 66 to 70 AD. Now, how many Jewish wars are there? 2. I'm holding up 3 because there was a third one, but I'll do the big 2. The first one is 66 to 70 AD that led to the destruction of what? The Second Temple in Jerusalem. And then a couple years later, it's the siege at Masada, right? That's the first Jewish war. Now, that was bad. That's bad, really bad. Well, the Bar Kokhba revolt, that's 131 to 133 AD, was the end. That's when they killed every Jew in the place, and anybody who was left, they're deported and they're forbidden to go to the Temple Mount. It becomes a pagan, they put a pagan shrine on top of the old Temple Mount. So Jews are prohibited from going to Jerusalem. And it pretty much stayed that way until when? 1948, when Israel became a state, right? So the second Jewish war is really bad. Bar Kokhba claimed to be the Messiah, and he led an army, and the Romans went in mercilessly, ethnic cleansing, right? So the first Jewish war is bad, but the second Jewish war is even worse. The first Jewish war, he's a priest, he's a Pharisee, he goes back, and when the war breaks out in 66 AD, they said to this 29-year-old Josephus guy, hey, you've been to Rome? You be our general. They made him a general of the rebel army in Galilee. Jesus of Galilee, up there north, okay? So Was Josephus a great general? Not really. He's like a nerd. He's a college professor trained in reading scrolls. Doesn't know anything about it. And how did that one work out? Well, he ends up trying to organize and rally troops. Is it really hard to get troops to volunteer to go fight the Romans? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really, now you go on without me. I'll send me a postcard on how it worked out for you. In other words, it's really nasty stuff. He goes to Tiberias to try to organize a revolt. Then he finally ends up going back into Galilee. And what ends up happening? He runs into people who don't like the idea that Josephus is a general. Why? Because they want to be the general, right? So the Jews had factions within factions within factions. So what happened to the Native Americans anyway? Do you ever wonder why, when the Pilgrims got off the boat and in 1620, I don't know how they found the rock with a number on it, but somehow they found that rock. They get off the boat. Why didn't they just kill them all right there? There's only 102 of them, right? It would have just kill them all. They didn't do it because there's over 500 nations, right? And they're family clan tribes, and they're fighting each other. You know, the Iroquois people hate the Algonquin people, and so they're fighting all the time. If they got their act together and made one united Native American army, it would have been no match. They would have slaughtered all the whites, and that would have been the end of the story, right? So the Jews are sort of like that. Each a little faction, you know, everyone, God told me that I'm the leader, let's follow me. So they have all these little groups of guerrilla warfare warriors running around. Finally, Josephus gets his big chance to be the general. It's a city called Jotapada. What does it look like? It looks sort of like Burger Hill. And the village is on top of the hill. Okay? Is that good? Yeah, because when you come running up the side of the hill, they can throw rocks at you and kill you before you get to the top of the hill. So taking a hill is a hard thing to do, even with modern weapons. So, Jotapada is on top of the hill. It's a 47-day siege. And the Romans, if they show up to your town, what is the correct answer when they say surrender? What's the correct answer? Yes. If you don't, are they going to go away? The answer would be no. They stay there until you're dead or enslaved and your village is burned down. In other words, the Romans only go one way. They're not like, oh, let's just have a peace treaty. No, no, no. If they show up and they tell you you better surrender. Well, they didn't surrender. So they had vicious fighting. Finally, somehow, Josephus makes it out alive, along with, I say, a group of about 10 or 12 other rebels, and they're in a cave hiding out because the Romans are coming around killing everybody. So they decide, we can't let the Romans take us alive. What happens if you're taken alive and you're rebelled by the Romans? You're probably going to get crucified. And some people last on the cross up to 9 days before they die. No, thank you. So they draw straws. And each one, you get the long straw, you get killed first, and then the next one kills the next one, kind of like a Masada, except the last one is the only one who's going to be alive. Guess who the last one was? Josephus, right? So in mathematics, they had this thing called the Josephus problem, where you take probabilities. You probably know this one, right? And what is the probability with each draw of the straw that you're going to be the last one surviving? This is, work on this math problem for me.
9 to the 9th power.
Well, what is that?
You got one chance in 9 to the 9th power.
See, there you go. So maybe we'll play this game on church on Sunday. We'll have like human sacrifices in front of the church. Get like the church council lined up and we'll draw straws.
It's actually...
Yeah, here you go. See? Obsession.
No, in the first lottery, you have one chance in 9.
Yeah.
Right? Then in the first
One dead.
lottery, so then it's one chance in 8. Okay? All the way down to finally one chance in 2. Okay? So it's one chance in 9 factorial.
There you go.
Okay, or 9 times 8 times 7.
Because of probability, each roll of the dice is an independent roll, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I know, but each time your options is one guy less.
Yeah.
Okay, So yes.
So that's called the problem, the Josephus problem you know. So anyway, and many people who are,
If I had a calculator, I could.
well, many people who are skeptical, including myself, would probably argue that who's the one that drew the straws? I think he probably fixed it so that he was the one who survived. Not that I'm a cynic about this stuff. Anyway, so he survives this. Now, what happened to the survivor?
He wrote a book.
They take the survivor, Josephus, and they take him before Vespasian, who's the general who's in charge of the siege of Jotapata. And what is the usual Roman response? Kill him in a heinous way and make him really suffer. But just before they take him out to kill him, Josephus, wait a minute, oh, I have a moment of enlightenment. I foresee that you, Vespasian, will be the next emperor of Rome. Now the Romans are very superstitious, so Vespasian thinks Josephus is a Jewish prophet because he heard about prophets somewhere along the line. So you can't, what happens if you kill a prophet? That's bad, because then God might whack you or something, right? So Vespasian keeps him alive. Guess what happens? A few days later, a runner comes from Rome. It's called the Year of Four Emperors. Nero, you know, and then there's three other emperors that lasted a couple of weeks, you know. Vitellius was the last Roman emperor. He was a drunken idiot who liked to party, and he didn't pay the Praetorian Guard, you know, like the Secret Service, the normal reward that they get for being loyal. So what do? They killed him. And so the only emperor standing with a vigorous field army is Vespasian. He becomes the next Roman emperor, just like Josephus said. So then the son of Vespasian is Titus. He becomes the next commander of the army, the legions in Rome, trying to quash this Jewish revolt. And so Josephus then says he becomes an interpreter. He becomes an advisor to Titus on Jewish affairs. So is Josephus popular in the Jewish community for the last couple thousand years? The answer would be no. He's regarded as a traitor, like Benedict Arnold or Judas himself, right? And so he's also regarded as, you know, a manipulator, an opportunist, you know. He's really regarded as a bad, like a villain. Okay, so then he's taken with Titus to Jerusalem, and he witnesses the siege of Jerusalem. And what is that like? He writes like it's a Hollywood production or something. He talks about, oh, the tremendous fighting and the Jews, and the atrocities and cannibalism and fires and you know, all kinds of stuff happens. And with this graphic description, I mean, it's really, really interesting reading, really graphic, right? Yeah, things like Jews would try to escape in the middle of the night, the siege, because they ran out of food in the city, because the Romans cut them off. And if they captured you, they would put you on a cross and then slit open your throat because they thought that they would swallow gold. So they would always try to find gold among the Jews. And they used up all the wood in the greater Jerusalem area, building crosses to crucify the escaped Jews who are trying to get out of Jerusalem. I mean, it's unbelievable. And in Jerusalem, how many, was it a united Jewish front? The answer would be no. They had at least 2, 3, or 4 zealot leaders who were in command of their own little group of merry men, and they were fighting each other while you're supposed to be fighting the Romans standing outside the wall. So there's like internal chaos going on, and and who gets the food when the food runs out anyway?
The higher-ups.
Yeah. The strong people get the food, and the weak people get to starve. And there's one really horrible story about a woman named Mary, not the Mary we know, and a soldier came by and smelled something cooking, and there's no food around, so he looks in and she's cooking her own baby over the fire.
Oh, good heavens.
Yeah. So this is the kind of stuff Josephus puts in there. I mean, it's like really like awful. It's So he survives the destruction of the temple, and incidentally, when Josephus tells the story, whose fault is it that the temple is destroyed?
The Jews.
Yeah, Titus, of course, he honors the temple, the beautiful architecture, and the one God that's over the site, and he wants to save the temple. But the zealot fanatics, they go to the temple and they try to make their last stand in the temple. And of course, one thing leads to another. Next thing you know, a fire breaks out, it's burned to the ground, and the Roman engineers come in, not one stone left upon another. They throw the stones off the edge of the Temple Mount, and you can still see the damage today if you go to Israel. I mean, it's an unbelievable thing. And Josephus saw the whole, he was there for the whole thing, right? All right, so it's that. This is a characteristic of Josephus when he writes his book. He's writing it to make it look like the Romans are kind of peacekeepers, and he's like pro-Roman, and the Jews, not all Jews, but the zealots, the lunatics, or the terrorists are the ones that caused all this problem. It would be like somebody in Hamas, somebody who's living in Gaza, and they're gonna write a book about the Israelis aren't really that bad, and the Hamas people are really the horrible people, and they're fighting each other. So that it's that kind of a viewpoint. So then what happens? He's taken to Rome, Josephus, and he becomes his patron is Vespasian, and this is the Flavian house. So that's why he's called Flavius Josephus. He's adopted by the Flavian dynasty, and so he stays in Rome the rest of his life, and there he writes his books. And there are 4 books that come down to us. The first is the Jewish War, 75 AD. Is this interesting stuff? Yeah, an eyewitness account. He wrote it in 75, so that's 5 years after the destruction of the temple. So in other words, do people like to read, like the New York Post and stuff? Yeah, we like that, right? All the gory details of all kinds of stuff going on. That's what this is like, okay? And it was a big bestseller in Jerusalem or in Rome. People want to know about this, and he makes who comes across in a great light? Vespasian and his son Titus, the general, the heroic people, and then he writes another thing called the Antiquities of the Jews, 94 AD. This toward the end of his life. What is it? It's a retelling of the Old Testament, right? It would be like someone who's Linda, what book are you reading right now? The Promise That. What is that book you're reading? It's like a retelling of the Bible, right?
Yeah, is it the book?
Yeah, the book is. She's reading something, and basically it's a paraphrase or a retelling of the story of the Bible. I like Hurlbut's Story of the Bible from like 1890. He just tells you the story, the narrative of the Bible. That's what Josephus does in Antiquities of the Jews. And who would be interested in that? The Romans love it because they like old stuff. They like antiquity. They like religions from the East. So he's retelling the story of the Old Testament to try to explain to these people that monotheism is a good idea, and it comes from a noble heritage that goes back to Adam. It's from the creation up until the first Jewish war. It's a delicious book. And is it 100% accurate? It doesn't match the Old Testament because it's kind of like a sermon. Like a midrash, he kind of like spins it to make it more interesting. He takes out certain things and adds certain things. So you don't want to say, I'm going to change my religion and believe in Josephus' Antiquities of the Jews from now on and forget the Bible. No, the Bible is your primary source, but the Jewish War, very interesting for people who know a little something about the Old Testament to read. It's a fun book to read. And sort of look for, well, that's different than the Bible, okay? Now, then he writes against Appian. Who's he? He's an Egyptian who doesn't like Jews, who writes a couple of books mocking Judaism. So he steps in to defend Judaism in the Greco-Roman world, and then he writes a Vita. That's his life. It's a brief story of his life, and of course, what's the main purpose of all of his writings? To make himself look good. It would be like Benedict Arnold going back to England and writing a book about the American Revolution. He wants to make himself look like the hero. He's the rational one, and the lunatics are the ones that did the war. And so what are some problems when you approach and you read Josephus, okay? First of all, what do you want to read? You want to read this one, Paul L. Meyer. One of the reasons I'm doing Josephus today is that Paul Meyer died a couple of days ago. And he was a Missouri Synod Lutheran pastor, a real gentleman and a real scholar. He was a professor at Western Michigan University, and he retired, and he wrote like this many books. He also wrote and published a book on Eusebius, early church history, and he wrote several novels. One of his novels is about Pontius Pilate. Kind of interesting guy. Okay, go ahead.
It's called The Story.
Okay, The Story.
Yeah.
And it's just a narrative of the Bible without all the hoopla, no religion stuff. It's just the Bible story, right? Which is good to know. All right, so
Excellent.
Paul Meyer. So this is a good book. Again, it's got the charts and graphs and it helps in it, and it's a modern translation. Stop, I'm also talking about this for a minute. Why do we have copies of Josephus kicking around? Do you know that in classical literature, Greco-Roman literature, only 5% of it survives? So 95% of classical literature, we know that exists, but it's gone. The scrolls are all gone. The great tragedy of the fire in Alexandria, Egypt, where they burned the library. Alexandria was a port, and whenever a ship would come in, they would say, do you have any scrolls? Yeah, we do. They would copy the scrolls and put it in the library. Well, you do that for several centuries. They had over 250,000 scrolls. The knowledge of the ancient world was stored at the Alexandria, and it was burned. And we don't know who did it. It could be Islamic fanatics. It could be Christian fanatics. We don't quite know, but it was like the library is destroyed. So, but for some reason, Josephus survived. Why is that? He survived for a number of reasons, right? Let me see, I made some of these reasons here. First of all, who is his patron again? You mean to say if you have the Roman emperor be your patron, that might be a book you might want to have on your shelf? Like you're in Nazi Germany? Yeah, here's my copy of Mein Kampf. I keep it next to my bed all the time. It's my copy right there. See it, Mein Kampf, right? You open it up, crack. You didn't read it, but you have the copy of it. Okay? So because he had imperial patronage, it's a bestseller. So it's copied out. Then it also survived because of the Testimonium Flavium. Okay, what is that? This is in the middle of Jewish antiquities. Okay, I have a copy of this today. You want to read this today? This is our text of the day. Okay, so this is what Josephus said about Jesus. Is that interesting? Now, why is that important? Well, it would be nice to hear about Jesus from somebody who's not a Christian. Like we know that Paul and Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they like Jesus and they want to make him look good, and so the Gospels and so on. Well, Josephus writes about Jesus, and it's from the Jewish War. There are 20 books, 20 volumes in this thing. It's book number 18, and it's verses 63 to 64. And so let's read what this says. About this time, there lived Jesus, a wise man, if indeed one ought to call him a man. For he was one who performed surprising deeds, and was a teacher of such people as accepted the truth gladly. He won over many Jews and many Greeks. He was the Christ. And when, upon the accusation of principal men among us, Pontius Pilate, condemned him to the cross, those who had first come to love him did not cease. He appeared to them, spending a third day restored to life. For the prophets of God had foretold these things and 1,000 other marvels about him. And the tribe of Christians, so-called after him, has still to this day not disappeared. Why did the works of Josephus survive? Because the Christian religion was thriving at this time. 2nd, 3rd century, 4th century, it spread throughout the Roman Empire. So anybody who writes something positive about Jesus outside of the Bible, yeah, you want to have a copy of that book on your shelf, right? So that's one of the reasons why it survived. Now, what does Paul Meyer? He devoted a lot of his academic career to studying, ancient manuscripts and studying Josephus and so on. He says, okay, there's 3 possible arguments here. The first one, it's entirely authentic. All right, the whole thing's authentic, right? or it's an entirely a Christian forgery stuck into the Josephus story to give it credibility. So it's either all true or it's all false. Or the third alternative is the authentic material about Jesus it contains authentic material, but Christian interpolations exist in some parts. Okay? Now, let's go through this thing. What is Josephus' religion again? Okay, what's a Jew anyway? Hear, O Israel, the Lord thy God is one. What's the first commandment again? No other gods before me. Okay, Jews do not accept Jesus as the Messiah because he's crucified, hung on a tree. Cursed is he that's hung on a tree, Deuteronomy 21 and 22. So he can't be the Messiah if he's hung on a tree. Okay? So they can't get past that. It's a stumbling block. So, would a Jew write this? Look at the text again. About their time there lived in Jesus a wise man. Now, would a false Messiah be considered a wise man? They'd be considered a fool who you don't talk about. You strike the record and you make no mention of him. It's called impeaching a witness. Okay? If indeed we ought to call him a man. Is that something a Jew would say? You're pretty skeptical about that one, right? For he was one who performed surprising deeds. Is that true? Yeah, that would probably be true, right? And he was a teacher of such people accepted gladly. He won over many Jews and many Christians. Is that true? Yeah, that would be a true statement. And he was the Christ. Now, would Josephus say that?
No.
If he said that, he would probably quit his day job of being a lackey and apologist of the Flavian dynasty in Rome, and he would be like St. Paul, go around convincing people that Jesus is the real deal, that he's the Christ. In fact, some of the zealot lunatics they claim to be the Messiah, right? And it ended in a disaster. So he's not going to throw that term around. And when upon the accusation of the principal men among us, Pilate condemned him to the cross. Okay, what is that again? Cursed is he is hung on a tree. And those who first come to love him did not. He appeared on the third day and restored to life. Okay, that's the DBR, the death burial. It sounds like the Apostles' Creed, doesn't it? Right? For the prophets of God had foretold many things. These are the 333 Messianic prophecies I always talk about. And the tribe of Christians, so-called after him, followers of Christ, the Christos, are still around today. Now, so if this is entirely authentic, then what do you do about Josephus that we know about, that he was a Pharisee and a Jew, and I mean that doesn't quite compute, right? Well then, is it a Christian forgery? Well, but there are some parts of it in here that are true. So the third option is the one that Paul Meyer likes. And so you would go through and you would say, about that time there lived Jesus. Is that true? Mm-hmm. Okay, so people that argue that a person named Jesus never existed, they don't know what they're talking about. Because there are references in places like Tacitus and Josephus that he's a historical person. You might not agree he's the Messiah, but he lived, there really wasn't Jesus. So it's up to you to figure out what to do with him. Is he a prophet, priest, king, or Messiah, whatever, right? So you can't get away with saying there's no Jesus. And is he a wise man? Well, yeah, I mean, you would say you have to explain him somehow. Sermon on the Mount, all right? And if you ought to call him a man, that one, okay, maybe we could strike that one. For he was one who performed surprising deeds. Did Jesus do miracles? Mm-hmm. And in the Gospels, over and over again, they're trying to explain away the miracles, right? And when the Gospel writers write about the miracles of Jesus, they always make it so that you can't explain it away. Like Transfiguration Sunday, who was there to witness it? Peter, James, and John, 3 witnesses, not 2, 3. Are they hallucinating? No. Are they sleeping? No. So somehow you have to deal with their testimony. And they're credible people, eyewitnesses, who saw the Transfiguration, right? So, or something like, look, Lord, we found 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Oh, there's not enough there to feed everyone. There's 5,000 people here. There's always an objection to make it impossible for a human being to do this just by saying there's hidden food somewhere and let's bring that out. You see? Okay, so when you read, be very careful. You literary stuff here. So he likes this. There's authentic material about Jesus in here. And things like he's won over by Jews and Christians. Pilate condemned him to death. That's true, right? And he was crucified. And then what? Well, we'll skip the resurrection part. The prophets talked about him, right? And there are Christians that are around today. So you can take this testimony of Flavius and minimize it down, but you still have to deal with the fact that Christ, there really was a person named Jesus, right? And another place, it's in Antiquities of the Jews, book number 20. There's a whole section in there about, in fact, Darrell will read it to you. All right, this is in 20, verses 20 through 200 through 204. All right. The younger Ananias, who's that? That's the high priest. So you know that Joseph, Caiaphas, and Ananias were the high priest that year. So this would be like 20 years later. His son, Ananias II, is the high priest. And the Roman governor, Festus at the time, died, and they were bringing in a new Roman governor. So between the gap of the Roman governors, like Pontius Pilate, that's when the Sanhedrin decided, well, now's our chance to do rotten stuff here, because the Romans aren't restraining us now. So they brought a man named James. Who's James? The brother of Jesus. So this is not James and John, the disciples. This is the brother of Jesus, who was the first bishop of Jerusalem. Remember, his own family didn't believe him until after the resurrection. James, the book of James, is written by that James. So James, the brother, was brought, James, the brother of Jesus, who is called the Christ. So that's in Josephus. So he's calling James the brother of, and this is written within the context of people who would have known. There's a bishop named James who claims to be the brother of Jesus, who was what? They brought him before the Sanhedrin and they stoned him to death. So they had an illegal trial in the dark of night and took him out by the edge of town and killed him, just like they did with Saint Stephen, martyr and deacon, and Jesus. It's an illegal trial, right? So that's here. This is in Josephus, right? So Christ is mentioned twice anyway. All right. Then, around the year 300 AD, Eusebius of Caesarea Maritimia writes this book called Ecclesiastical History. It's the history of the early church from going back to, say, the book of Acts, the Pentecost Sunday, up until the time of Constantine. Remember, that's when the Christian religion becomes a licit religion. And in here, he quotes Flavius Josephus as an authority. So from around the year 300 AD, that's the golden moment for Josephus. So they make copies of copies of copies. So there's Josephus books all over the place. It's in Greek, translated into Latin in the 4th century. There's Slavic copies of it. There's copies all over the place. It's a very popular book. So again, by the time you get to the 19th century, most farmers in New York would have the Bible and Josephus next to each other on the shelf, right? Now, might as well talk about this for a second. What copy of Josephus did they have? They didn't have the Joseph L. Meyer translation and abridgment. No, they had the William Whiston translation from 1737. Now, I know you. I've been ranting about Josephus for, I don't know, 10 years now. And so what did you do? You went out and bought the cheapest translation of Josephus you could get. It's like $8 or something. And what is it? It's the William Whiston translation from 1737. And what happens when it arrives in the mail from Amazon? You hate me, Pastor Mark, the world's nicest guy. You hate me. Why? Because it's in 5-point type. And it's in 2 columns like this. And it's impossible to read because it's written in sort of bad King James English, early modern English. It's really awful. You have to really loathe yourself to want to sit down and go through this translation. That's why you want to read a modern translation of it, right? Or if you don't want to take that one, read this one. This is from the Loeb Classic Library, right? Published by Harvard University. And this is the Lewis H. Feldman translation. and this has the Greek on one page and the English on the other. So this is like the academic authority. So people see this, they go, oh, I'm impressed. You've got the real deal in your hands, okay? So, but it's not the William Whiston trend. Now, do we have, who's William Whiston? Lunatic, right? Who's he? You've heard of Sir Isaac Newton before. You've heard of him.
Yeah.
All right, well, about half of Sir Isaac Newton's writings, what are the subject matter about half of his writings?
Either the occult or alchemy.
Yeah, he's interested in the book of Revelation and like religious stuff. He's got his own system, right? And what will we say about that? He's a lunatic. John Maynard Keynes, Keynesian economics, he doesn't like Jesus, he doesn't like God, he's a socialist, right? So when the papers of Sir Isaac Newton came up for auction, he bought them because he thought it would be a way of like really like, you know, supporting science against religion. And when he got these documents, what are they? They're like religious rantings of a crazy person, right? So Sir Isaac Newton was a Unitarian. What does that mean? He denies the Holy Trinity. There's one God. You can't, if you use reason, you can't accept the Holy Trinity. You know, come on Trinity Sunday. But he didn't say that in print because he would lose his cushy day job. He's a professor at Cambridge University. So he had a disciple named William Whiston. William Whiston, he's an enthusiastic, he's probably smarter than Sir Isaac Newton. That's what they say, believe it or not. Yeah, he wrote a book on calculus and, you know, planet motation, all kinds of, well, he got interested in the religious writings of Sir Isaac Newton. And so he made the mistake of saying, I'm a Unitarian. And can you have a professor, can you be a professor at Cambridge University and be a Unitarian? You're fired. So he basically spent the rest of his career in coffee shops doing like seminars on things like the dimensions of King Solomon's temple. He started a movement called primitive Christianity, where he thought that modern Christianity was corrupt with the Apostles' Creed, so there's no creed to get rid of all that. You want to read primitive Christianity. And he kind of died, but as a part of his primitive Christianity movement, he translates Josephus into English. Because a lot of things that Josephus, he really likes that. He thinks it's like an authentic document that's equal in authority to the Bible. Okay? So, and William Whiston. So in the 19th century, you had had the William Whiston translation. Right? Very interesting character. And it's unreadable, right? And it also is right because it's the only first-hand account of the destruction of the temple. Now, when you read Josephus, I'll go through this very quickly here. What do you have to look out for? Well, he's an eyewitness. Is that a good thing? Yeah. Unfortunately, he's a liar a lot of times. He tends to, you know, like a politician, you know, they put the spin on things to make themselves look good. Oh no, it's not my fault. Oh no, it's the fault of the enemy, right? So he's very pro-Roman, and he makes Vespasian and Titus look almost like gods in their fighting, and they're such great enlightened people. And he blames fanatics, different factions of zealots fighting in the temple. And what are the three philosophies that he writes about? Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and the fourth one are the zealots. Okay, so I talk about this all the time when we talk about, you know, I do sermons, the four different factions. And so the Jews aren't agreed among themselves, right? And he tends to exaggerate, especially when it comes to numbers. So he'll say something like, 2 million people were killed in the fight or the slaughter or something. Well, what's that all about? In the ancient world, when historians would write, people like Thucydides, they would often puff the numbers. Why is that? Because a great enemy, if you defeat a great enemy, it means you're a great warrior. So the bigger the numbers of the enemy, like, June 6, 1944, we stormed the beaches of Normandy, and there was 50 million Nazis there, and a handful of men stormed the beach with Bangalore mines, and they slaughtered all the Nazis. And the men that stormed Normandy Beach are the greatest men who ever lived. They're demigods. They're just outstanding. So in other words, a big enemy makes you look better when you achieve a victory, right? It wouldn't be like, and there were 10 old men and boys standing the walls, and our legion overran them. It just doesn't quite have the zing to it, does it? So the guy knows how to tell a story, okay? He's also an ego, okay, sorry.
I'm sorry, could you please repeat the four things that Josephus writes about?
Yeah, the four philosophy, he calls them philosophies,
Philosophies.
right? It's Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and the fourth one would be the Zealots, with all their different factions, okay? So it's important to know when you read the Bible, oh, he's a Pharisee, he's a Sadducee, he's a, Essene, the word Essene doesn't appear in the New Testament, but the Dead Sea Scrolls do, right? So Dead Sea Scrolls tell us about that fourth party. And we knew about it from reading Josephus. We knew there were Essenes. We didn't quite know where they were. So now we have the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it verifies about this faction that Josephus was talking about. He's also an egomaniac. He defends his career. And the problem is, he's a traitor, a coward, a villain, a turncoat, and an opportunist. But he makes it look like, he's General Patton or something. Okay? So you have to be careful of that. He's very conceited at times. Why? He's trying to defend his honor against Jewish readers who would go, this guy is Benedict Arnold, right? So he's trying to make himself look good. He's very wordy, right? So he writes volumes and volumes and volumes. Like Charles Dickens got paid 5 cents a word, so his books are really long. That's like this. And there are speeches in there by generals and leaders that Josephus could not have heard the speech. So he kind of like reconstructs the speech based on what he thinks they might have said. It's like reading Michael Shara, Killer Angels about the Battle of Gettysburg. He puts words into the mouth of General Lee that he probably didn't really say, but he could have said in that situation. So Thucydides does this. These great harangues, great. First of all, if you're standing in front of 50,000 men, how are they going to hear your speech, right? Even if you're a great orator, it's hard to project that much. And his Old Testament history, these are midrashes. They're kind of like sermons, So again, be careful of that. And he, so one of the things that Paul Meyer, he strips out all of that stuff and he gives you like the essential stuff you need to know. And what's in here? We know about the Pharisees, Sadducees. We know about the Herodian dynasty. We know about the various Roman emperors. We know about the Roman governors that were there, right, including Pontius Pilate. There's a lot of information in here about John the Baptist, right? Remember, I'm always talking about John the Baptist all the time, especially around Advent. He was a rock star. He was huge. There's more about John the Baptist than there is about Jesus in the writings of Josephus. Fascinating, right? We also know about James the Just here. He's not really mentioned in the Bible, but we know about his background. So why do you want to read Josephus? It gives you background information to help you understand what the New Testament's all about. Remember, the New Testament is written before 70 AD, and they assume you know about current events. We don't know about current events. So somehow you have to bridge the hermeneutical gap and go back 2,000 years and go, what's a Pharisee? What's a Roman? What's the what's an Idumean? What is this? So Josephus is really useful in understanding the context of the New Testament. But again, it has its limits. So let caveat emptor, let the reader beware, the buyer beware. So you read it and you go, that's good. I'll file it in the hopper, along with the other evidence we have, and then it'll make me a more informed reader of the New Testament, right? So I better end because that's about an hour. Are there any questions, sir?